Добрий день.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Ola Tamanova, and it's my pleasure to welcome you at Ukraine Media Center today. Today we will be talking about agricultural sector. We will be discussing the challenges faced by our agrarians. We will discuss the situation in the food market, the sowing campaign, and other matters. So let me introduce our speaker. Joining us today is Denis Marchuk, Deputy Chairman of the Ukrainian Agricultural Council. Good afternoon, Mr. Denis. Good afternoon. So I cannot help but start in our conversation with the most recent massive strikes by the Russians, plus abnormal temperatures below zero outside. So how did it impact agricultural sector, starting with the consequences of shellings and with logistics? Well, it did affect the sector because we can see the consequences of the enemy's attacks that are being intensified in the regions. We feel the impact on the export potential, the strikes on the Odessa port and small ports of Danube significantly affected the amounts of Ukrainian exports. Basically, the indicators are 45% less than the indicators of the last year. About 16 million tons were exported, and last year this figure was 6 million tons more. We know that such conditions create negative consequences for currency profit, timely financing of the agricultural producers in their preparation for the upcoming sowing campaign. We know that now is the time when the farmers need to buy fuel, seeds, new equipment, complete the maintenance to prepare for the works in the fields. So the lack of funds is affecting the effectiveness of the agricultural sector, which entails the strike on the economy of Ukraine, which creates additional burden on the operation of the businesses. In the same way, the manufacturers that are oriented at the internal market, as the strikes on the critical infrastructures are continuing, increase the price of products. We can see it in such categories as meat, dairy products, crops. Unfortunately, such tendency demonstrates that the crops may become at least 5% expensive shortly. The situation with the meat is more or less stable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the prices are not going to change in future. The price of eggs may grow about 10% in January and February. The cost of preservation of vegetables has increased too. In autumn, the prices remained stable, but now the prices started growing because the vegetables need to be stored in the specialized storage systems. The greenhouse vegetables became more expensive. What we manufacture is extremely important, and the majority of businesses ceased any greenhouse production. The cost of bread keeps growing month by month, at least 1.52%, and this is the tendencies that we are going to keep observing because of the enemy's strikes on the infrastructure. So basically, the price of the food basket has grown and will keep growing. Unfortunately, in the year 2026, we will keep seeing the prices growing until the moment when the vegetables will start growing in the open ground that will not be affected by such factors as storage, spending for electricity for those which grow in greenhouses. So when the supply will be growing, it will influence the price respectively. Talking about the sowing campaign of 2026, what it does look like and to what extent the weather conditions influence it. Well, now we're seeing the end of the campaign of the winter crops sowing. It was finalized in the end of November, December. Some of the companies will keep harvesting corn because the inability to harvest them and dry it resulted in that corn staying in the fields. Now we're catching up with the situation. About 90% of the corn is harvested already. The total indicators when it comes to crops harvesting, it's 58 million. Oil crops 17.7 million. So the aggregate is about 76.4 million tons, which is a good indicator, and It's even better than the last year. And again, when it comes to exports, we need more exports, because if back in that period we don't export 40 million tons that we have planned, it means that the farmers need to store it in the storage facilities, which results in additional expenditures. Then logistics may come extra important, and the farmers won't be prepared to sow in the winter crops that are supposed to be sown in February in some regions. Well, let's see how the weather works, because the winter is abnormally cold, probably the coldest in 10 years. But generally, talking about the winter crops, that covers about 6.4 million hectares of land, the situation is normal. There are no non-standard situations happening in any farms. I know one case in Odessa region. There was no sufficient snow and the crops were freezing there. But now that the snow is there, the situation is under control. So what's going on with the storage? You mentioned corn. Is there a sufficient number of storage facilities to store it in such weather conditions? Well, basically, currently in Ukraine, the situation with the storage is not critical. Yes, we understand that since the beginning of the big war, the significant fraction of the infrastructure that was supposed to be serving as the storage facilities ended up in either temporarily occupied territories or was destroyed by the enemy. And unfortunately, the attacks on the agricultural companies continue. We document such occasions in Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Sumy, Chernihiv regions. That's a daily story. But taking into account the volumes of grain that needs to be stored, there is no critical situation with storage, because the agrarians now refuse the technology of silos and start storing their products in polymer sleeves and using other technologies that are way cheaper and are still effective. And the story with the polymer sleeves demonstrated that the lack of capabilities was replaced by those sleeves, and about 5 to 7 million tons of grain was stored in Ukraine in conditions like that, and technologically it didn't produce any harm on the grain. So the manufacturers keep using the same technology, and there is no critical situation. There are still issues with competition in price and policies, but the farmers are not eager to invest because no one knows where the next shahed is striking. So let's get back to the experts topic. Let's discuss the outlook. You're saying that we're worse this year compared to the previous year in December and in September. So do we have any chances to catch up? Well, basically now the government and the president of Ukraine take their best efforts to ensure the air defense for the agricultural companies, and the calls for the president to ensure safe storage in the ports of Odessa, because again, the strikes on Odessa is not a regional problem, it's a general national problem, and the problem that will echo in the world, because it results in the national problems. When the agrarians are unable to export, the state doesn't get any profit, and for the global community it's a problem because they don't get Ukrainian products timely, and respectively the prices may grow for a sectoral group. And in countries of Africa, Asia, and Middle East, it's a problem that may result in social stresses. So it's a cycle of interrelated parties that work together to ensure the safety in the port space of Ukraine. And basically we see that now the contracts are being renewed after a small pause that happened in November and in the beginning of December last year. So the demand for Ukrainian products is still going, given the effects of bad harvest in the United States. So there is interest, and it's necessary to preserve the security situation with the logistics, but the situation with the logistics entails additional insurance costs, and hence we see the situation with the insurance. If it gets more expensive, the farmers get less profit for their prices, and we don't know to what extent they will be prepared to the next sowing campaign, because the exchange rate for such currencies as euro and dollar that the farmers use to buy the new equipment and seed material, and respectively the cost of the sowing campaign of the year 2026 will be about 10 to 15% more expensive for the farmers. And given the demand for Ukrainian products, does the price for it grow? Because we understand there will be problems with the supply. Do you expect any deficit in some groups? No, in fact, when we had problems with the exports, the prices have fallen inside the country because there was a lot of supply and there was no opportunity to export all of the products. Now we're getting back to the conditional market prices, and if we preserve the security, we will be able to sell the products at market prices. We see more demand for Ukrainian corn now that was suspended for a little bit, and I hope that the armed forces of Ukraine and all of the parties involved in the matters of security of the ports of Odessa and smaller ports of Danube will take their best efforts, because this is on what the economy of the country depends on. So talking about the financial support for our agricultural sector, what is the situation with the state support and other kinds of support? Well, in the state budget, there are about 9.5 billion hryvnia allocated for the direct support for the farmers. That includes grant projects for growth of cattle, growth of goats, for example, for those who are involved in irrigation. There are compensation systems for construction and development of irrigation systems. There are greenhouse programs, horticulture programs, and in our opinion, what's most important is to contemplate the compensation program for the frontline territories per hectare, because the people, on top of facing the war on a daily basis, they were severely affected by the weather conditions, specifically southeastern regions, and it's important to allocate funds for them. And in the year 2026, in our activity as Ukrainian Agricultural Council, we will support the people from frontline territories to the maximum extent possible, because it's really difficult there. Are those 9.5 billion per year sufficient given the problems faced by the agrarians? Are there the areas that are severely lacking support? Well, obviously, the money is never enough. We understand that now that we're waging a war, we have to allocate a lot of money for security, but such allocations can still support small farmers to reinsure their risk when it comes to their interaction with the banks. For the medium-sized business, 579 lending program remains still an efficient tool, and it's important for our international partners to continue supporting this program, because it can predict the development given the conditions in which the farmers work in. So we all hope for the hostilities to end, and the end of hostilities will stimulate the development of investments, and as the investments develops, the number of programs will be growing. Thank you very much for this conversation, for all of the information that you've disclosed. And if there is anything left talking about the challenges, for example, top 3 challenges for the agrarians, can you? Well, I would stop at such an important aspect. It may sound as a signal to work, and it's related not only to the work and operation of the agrarians with their operational processes, but more probably with the investments in the future. As I said, now there is a big deficit of personnel, and depending on the attitude of agrarians to education is one of the processes that will support us during our post-war reconstruction. And I'm calling the agrarians, the head of the communities, to take a look at the new program in the educational institutions, agricultural sphere. Us as an Ukrainian Agricultural Council, we support it. It's been implemented in more than 200 schools all across Ukraine. It will cover 5,000 children this year in 19 regions of Ukraine, and that's a good investment in the future of your business. So those difficulties that we're facing now, we have to counter them, and without professionals, it will become even more difficult. So invest in education in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me remind you, joining us was Denis Marchuk, Deputy Chairman of the Ukrainian Agrarian Council. Thank you for staying with us. And at 1300, we will talk about the fuel market. And I would like to thank our security and defense forces, thanks to whom we can hold discussions like this here. And glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.